everyone. Nice to see there's a nicely filled shop today. Today we're giving a press conference primarily about Brexit and UKIP's plans for the Brexit negotiations. We're doing it here in Stoke-on-Trent, obviously, because we're in the middle of a by-election, but also because Stoke has been described as the capital of Brexit. Nearly 70% of people went out in this city on June 23rd and voted to leave the European Union. Of course, this is something we in UKIP have battled for many years. UKIP was formed. Gerard is a founding member of the party back in the early 1990s to extricate Britain from the European Union. We had our first real breakthrough in 1999 at the European elections when we had 3 MEPs elected. We had 12 MEPs elected in 2004, finishing third in those European elections. We finished second in 2009, finishing second in those European elections. In 2014, we became the first political party in this country since 1906 that wasn't the Labour Party or the Conservatives to go on and win a national election, and we fought it on the issue of getting Britain out of the EU. In 2016 we achieved Brexit, and Brexit would not have happened if it wasn't for the growth of UKIP. In 2013 we forced the then British Prime Minister to offer a referendum that he never wanted to give. He only gave it because he thought he was shooting the UKIP fox. He failed, and now we have Brexit as a result. And what did people vote for on June the 23rd? They voted to leave the European Union and also the single market. And that is perfectly clear. The then Prime Minister of the day, David Cameron, the then Chancellor, George Osborne, the then Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, they all said leaving the European Union means leaving the single market. So for now, for politicians to say that the British people didn't know what they were voting for, that we should somehow stay within the single market, is somewhat disingenuous. And look at where the other political parties are on this issue today. Now, Theresa May gives speeches which sound like UKIP conference speeches, but the one thing that we know from Theresa May is that she's always been very good at talking the talk, but not very good at walking the walk. Take, for example, her record as Home Secretary. Whether that is tackling Islamic fundamentalism, whether that is getting the numbers of people coming to this country down to the tens of thousands, she's failed time and time again. And that is why it's so important that we have a strong, electorally viable UKIP to hold the government's feet to the fire and ensure that we get real, clean Brexit. The Labour Party are completely all over the place on this issue. The rebels were going to be sacked, then they weren't going to be sacked, then they were going to be sacked, and now they're not going to be sacked at all. A quarter of their parliamentary party revolted against the whip. In their heart, their parliamentary party want to remain within the EU, or at least the single market, but their grassroots, their voters, people in working class constituencies, voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU. I have respect for the Liberal Democrats, because at least they are honest. They want us to remain within the EU. They want to subvert the will of the people through another referendum. But at least they're not being disingenuous. As I said, this constituency voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU behind on June the 23rd. In one of the wards in this constituency, 87% of people voted to leave the European Union. That is why they need a true Brexit MP. They need someone to ensure that their will is enacted. And I am the only candidate in this by-election who is a true Brexiteer, who has always stood on a platform wanting real, clean Brexit, a Brexit whereby we control our own borders, a Brexit whereby we don't have to comply with EU regulations and directives. A Brexit whereby we don't have to pay anything into the EU pot, and a Brexit whereby we can sign our own trade deals across the globe once again. The Conservative candidate in this by-election was an open Remainer. The Lib Dem candidate has made it clear he wants to see another referendum. Well, the Labour candidate has called Brexit a bag of you-know-what and claimed that people who voted for Brexit were somehow confused. That they are not the right people to go into the House of Commons and represent the views of this constituency. And Brexit will be great for Stoke-on-Trent. Take the ceramic industry, for example. There will be a huge boost to this industry from us being able to sign free trade deals with the United States, with the countries of the Far East. But at the same time, another boost will come from us being able to protect ourselves from Chinese dumping by setting our own tariffs. There is nothing to be afraid of from Brexit. It gives us a bright future. And if I am elected on February the 23rd, and we can make Stoke-on-Trent the capital of change, it truly will be game, set and match Brexit. I'm now going to hand over to you, to UKIP's Brexit spokesman, who will set out where we plan to go on this issue. He's one of our founding members. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Gerard Batten, MEP for London.
Right, well, good morning, everybody. Great to see such a big crowd out today. First of all, I'm very pleased to come along and support Paul in this by-election. And I was very pleased back in, I think it was November, when Paul was elected as the UKIP leader, to accept his offer to be the spokesman on Brexit. I've been thinking about it for quite a long time, about 44 years actually, although I do try and think about other things sometimes. I never wanted to join the European Economic Community as it then was, and I've always dreamed of leaving, and here we are on the brink, so we hope, of actually making that happen. First things first, can we stop saying Brexit means Brexit? Brexit means exit. It means leaving the European Union, and that's what the British people voted for on the 23rd of June. I've known Paul for about 10 years now, and in fact I encouraged Paul when he was a researcher for UKIP in Brussels to actually seek candidature as an MEP, which he did. He was elected in 2009. He's done a great job, along with the rest of my colleagues, on representing Britain's, or defending Britain's interests in the European Union and working for this referendum, which we got and which UKIP won. I think that he's got three things which recommend him as the next MP for Stoke, and that is he's a man of courage, intelligence and principle, and he's going to need those qualities in a very difficult job. Now, I was up here in Stoke last week canvassing. I'm here this week and I'll be back for part of next week. One thing I got last week was a very clear message from the voters that I spoke to, that they feel that Stoke has been forgotten and abandoned, and they've had a Labour MP for a very long time. Now, like Paul, I grew up in a working class background. Paul came from Liverpool, I came from the East End of London. My father worked in the London docks. So I've seen Labour close up for a very long time. In the constituency where I live, we've had a Labour MP since I think 1894, when Keir Hardie was elected, and the London Borough of Newham is still one of the most deprived boroughs in the country. Labour stopped representing the working class a very long time ago. It's difficult now to see who they do represent, and I think we've got to stop talking about this liberal metropolitan elite that they're supposed to be part of. First of all, there's nothing wrong with elites. Whenever any of us go to the doctor or the dentist, we very much hope he's going to be an elitist and not an amateur. There's nothing wrong with elitists. And there's nothing wrong with being liberal, because UKIP is liberal in the real sense of the word, with a small L. These people are illiberal. They cannot tolerate a point of view which is different from theirs. And at worst, we've seen this at the weekend, where under Jeremy Corbyn, we've seen a resurgence of the thugs of the left, where they can't even enter into debate, but actually enter into physical confrontation. This is what Jeremy Corbyn represents, among other things. And these people do not represent the genuine interests of the working class. Three examples. First of all, you saw Gordon Brown in the 2005 general election. when one of his stalwart campaigners and activists, a certain Mrs. Duffy, had the temerity to criticise uncontrolled, unlimited immigration. And he described her as a bigot. And then we saw the other great representative of the working class, Emily Thornberry, during the 2015 general election, when she sneered at a voter for flying the English flag. It's okay to fly the Welsh flag or the Scottish flag, but the English are not allowed to have a flag and they have to be sneered at. And of course, the latest example of that is the candidate in this election, Gareth Snell, and I'm not quite sure whether he called it a bag of you-know-what or a pile of you-know-what in relation to Brexit. So that's what Labour thinks about an independent, democratic Britain, which is free to make its own laws, to elect its own government, to sack its own government, and to have a government that governs in the interests of ordinary people in this country. I think Gareth Snell sums it up. They think that aspiration is a bag or a pile of you-know-what. That's what Labour thinks. Now, what I'd like to do is to move on slightly, not slightly, but make a change in my tack here and talk about UKIP policy on Brexit. We cannot trust Mrs. May. Mrs. May was a Remainer. Had Remain won in the referendum, she would now be telling us it was the best thing for us and everything's going to be wonderful in the EU. The road that she's going down to go under Article 50, what's happened in the last 8 months? Nothing. Practically nothing. It's taken this long just to get a vote on Article 50 in the House of Commons, which was unnecessary anyway. She could have just done it the day after she was made Prime Minister if she wanted to. It only takes a note to the Council of the European Union. Instead of that, she allowed the Remainers to regroup and counter-attack, which they did in the courts. We've now had the vote. And of course now the House of Lords is threatening to delay the whole thing. And what is she planning to do? She's going to negotiate for the next 2 years with an organisation, the EU, that doesn't want to negotiate with us. They have absolutely no incentive whatsoever to agree this mythical deal that she's talking about. And at the end of that 2 years, even if we get this wonderful deal, we'll have had 2 years where not a single EU law would have been either repealed or amended. We would have had a whole load of new EU laws coming through the pipeline from Brussels, including a very big one in May, which I'll say something about later. Nothing would have changed, and we would have had almost 3 years from the time of the referendum date of further uncontrolled mass immigration in which anybody who wants to come in can, and we can sure that those numbers will be in the hundreds of thousands or even the millions of people getting in under the wire before anything is done about controlling. There is controlling immigration. There is another way of going about this. I'm writing the UKIP Brexit plan at the moment. I'll be saying more about that in detail at our conference on Friday in Bolton. And I'm afraid the document has been slightly delayed in being published because of the by-election, but it will be coming out, I hope, in March. And what are we proposing? Well, we can't make it happen, but we should be telling the government and the British people what should be happening. First of all, Parliament should repeal the 1972 European Communities Act as a first step in this process and not a final step. That would mean that we were no longer members of the EU under our law and our constitution. But chaos would not ensue. All EU law has been enacted into, all directives have been enacted into Acts of Parliament. They remain on the statute book and nothing changes. But it would allow the government to take emergency action on the big things that need doing, like immigration and border control, trade policy, farming, fishing and defence. Now, some of our opponents in the European Union have said that, oh, it'll take 10 years to negotiate a deal. No, it won't. If you're going to start and try to renegotiate every jot and tittle of about 172,000 pieces of legislation, which is what the EU's own website says exists, we'll be here till kingdom come. It will never happen, which is exactly what they want. This is why we have to seize the initiative. Our government has to put itself in control of the process and not the European Union. By repealing the Act, we take the commanding position and we say how we're going to leave. Mrs May is going to the EU as a supplicant, asking how we may leave, please. No, what should she be doing? What she should be doing is going there and saying, this is how we're going to leave and this is what we're going to do. And she is not doing that, and this is why we need Paul elected. I think that there are two main reasons why Paul should be elected. as the next MP for Stoke Central. One is that the people of Stoke need somebody who is genuinely going to try and represent their interests in Parliament, who is genuinely going to try and fight for regeneration and more jobs and prosperity in Stoke. And the second one is so that he can actually fight on the floor of the House of Commons for our genuine exit as speedily and as quickly and as completely as possible from the European Union. As Paul has said, all the other candidates in this election are Remainers. If the people of Stoke vote for a Labour MP in this election, they will get exactly what they had before. Nothing will change. As Paul said, 70% of people voted in one ward, 85%. If they vote Labour, they are voting, in fact, to annul the decision that they made on the 23rd of June. This is why they should vote UKIP, why they should vote for Paul. I'm happy to be here to support him. If you've got any more questions on Brexit or that I can answer, I'm only too happy to do it. Thank you very much indeed.
Any questions or one-to-ones or anything? Yes, your first, second.
So how exactly does it work in terms of getting an MP in the House of Commons and fighting for the Brexit you want? Whatever you think of Theresa May's plan, it's passed the House of Commons now. The vast majority of MPs are signed up to it, and there's not much else anyone can do until the end of the process when there's going to be a vote on the deal. So what exactly would
Because
happen?
what is going to happen in this process? I think that we are right in the position that we're taking now. We would like a government that's actually done this straight away. Obviously they're not going to do it. But it's going to become more and more apparent as this process goes on that we are not going to get what we want from the European Union because they have no incentive whatsoever to give it to us. And at the end of all this, what is going to happen, and Mrs May said this herself, at the end of this process there will be this mythical deal. It can be rejected by the Council of the European Union, it can be rejected by the European Parliament, and there's going to be a vote in the House of Commons where they could reject it as well. And she said, well, if that happens, if the EU rejects this deal, we'll just leave anyway, which we can do under Article 50. We have the right to unilateral withdrawal after 2 years of negotiations if we don't get the great deal that we're supposed to desire. So we could just do that anyway, in which case why not do it now and do it in an ordered and structured way which we control and not the EU. The other great danger here is at the end of this process the negotiations with the EU can be continued indefinitely by mutual agreement. And why wouldn't they agree since they don't want us to leave? So we could see a position where after 2 years they say, oh, we need another year, we don't need another 2 years. And what the Remainers here and the Remainers in the European Union hope is that this can be delayed long enough in order to reverse the decision of the referendum. So the reason to have Paul there is so that he's actually on the floor of the House of Commons saying these things, scrutinising what is actually happening, pointing out what should be happening, and keeping the voters of Stoke and the voters of the UK generally informed about what should be happening and not what they want to happen.
Mr Nuttall, the Mirror have a quote from Gareth Snell, your Labour opponent. It's about you. I'll read it to you. If Paul Nuttall has a genuine love for the Potteries, I will be amazed. All of a sudden, because there was a big Leave vote in the referendum and a timely by-election, he wants to brand himself as Mr Stoke. But if he's only interested in being the leader of UKIP in Parliament, he should pack his bags and sod off back where he came from.
Yeah.
Do you have a response to Mr Snell?
But you know, I'm not really going to get into it because, as the Admiral Jackie Fisher said, if you have a fight with a chimney sweep, you'll only ever get covered in soot.
Right, I see. Just to confirm though, if you lose this by-election, you will continue to live in Stoke?
If I lose the by-election, no, of course, I won't. No, if I win the by-election, I will move here. I've made that absolutely 100%. I will live here amongst the constituents, so I can live and breathe the problems that they have, work with them, and ensure that I represent them the best way possible.
But if you lose, then you won't be living here. You will leave.
No, of course, because I'm a North West MEP as well.
Can I say something on this? You know, they're making an issue about Paul. Many MPs all around the country, for all parties, don't come from their constituencies, don't live in their constituencies. So it's nothing new to have somebody coming from outside. At least Paul comes from somewhere nearby, and he does represent the working class because he came from them. He won't be going off if eventually, whatever happens, if he's a long-serving MP for Stoke. I doubt he's going to go off and become the next director of the V&A or anywhere else. So judge us by the same standard as everybody else.
I mean, look, for me to be attacked by the Labour Party on this issue is somewhat bizarre, considering that the Labour MP for Stoke North comes from Edinburgh and the Labour MP for Stoke South comes from Birmingham. Not quite local, you know, so I think it's slightly hypocritical and disingenuous. Any more questions? Yes?
Yeah. Gerard, have you all had discussions with the BCC yet about what your plans for Brexit would mean for the ceramics industry in Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, we already, never mind what the Brexit would mean, with the ceramic industry we met with last week, who explained to us that the latest EU legislation on CO2 emissions will actually put their energy costs up to the extent that they will be higher than their profits, and basically they'll go out of business. That's what the EU does for people like the ceramics industry. And I said to them last week when I saw them, you are just the latest in a long line of industries and businesses that come to us complaining that EU legislation is going to damage their interests and their businesses. What Brexit will mean for businesses, the ceramic businesses and all the other businesses in this country, is that we can free them from EU regulation, or much EU regulation, unnecessary regulation. We can actually lower their energy costs, because the British government should repeal the idiotic Climate Change Act 2004. And we can actually, as Paul said, open up the door to trade with the rest of the world. Can I say something on trade, if I may, as a detail on what we're going to be proposing? Much is made of this trade thing, and if you listen to the media, the BBC and Channel 4, etc., you'd think it's not possible to trade with the EU unless you're in the EU, because they constantly talk about access to the single market. Every country in the world has access to the single market. The biggest exporters to the EU, like China, Russia, Japan, South Korea, the USA, didn't find it necessary to become members of the European Union in order to trade with it. They do very nicely, thank you, outside. What we would propose to the EU is, we would like to continue with tariff-free trade, you would like to continue with tariff-free trade, so let's do that. Nothing needs to change. You can have 3 of your 4 freedoms. Freedom of movement of goods, services and capital, but you can't have people. And then nothing needs to change whatsoever. You can work that out in an afternoon on a sheet of paper. That's an offer that they can't refuse. If they did refuse it, the EU has then got to go to the German, French, Italian, etc. businesses and industries and explain to them why they want to put up the common external tariff against the UK, and why the UK will then have to put up the common external tariff against their businesses. So let the EU explain that to their businesses, because the EU is about ideology, it's not about the practicalities of trade. The practicalities of trade is, yes, we want tariff-free, we want freedom of goods, services and capital, we don't need absolute freedom of people, and we can offer them that, and then they've got to explain why they don't want it. And if they don't want it, we go back on World Trade Organization terms, and those tariffs are fairly minimal anyway for non-agricultural goods. So it's a big non-issue, really.
Just on Charlie Coogan from Politico, just on World Trade Organization terms, do you accept that there would be some negative economic impact from the UK leaving the EU and going on to those terms, in the short or medium term?
Well, don't forget, we're already trading with those terms for most of the rest of the world anyway. So what would happen is, if the EU insisted that it wanted to go on that we would have to go on World Trade Organization terms, the tariffs are fairly low now, about 2.3%, I think, on non-agricultural. It averages out to about 4.3. So I don't think that there would be a big negative impact. The negative impact is going to be on continental businesses, because they sell us far more than we sell them. And don't forget, we would then be free to go to all the other countries in the world, as Paul says, if we wanted to negotiate free trade deals with them. So I think that, and I've argued this for years, it would actually boost our economy to leave the European Union. 100% of businesses in this country have to obey EU regulation. I think it's only about 10 or 9% of businesses are actually engaged with international trade with the EU. So most of the economy is actually domestic. It isn't concerned with international trade, about 8%, 70 to 80%. So we can free those businesses up for a start off. And export businesses that are predominantly aiming at international trade, they will find it much easier to deal with the rest of the world, I think, outside of the EU. Much is made of all this trade deals. We don't need trade deals to trade with the rest of the world, but if you are going to have them, The EU is saying it takes 10 years to negotiate one. Yes, of course it does, because it has to do it on behalf of 28 countries, including Romania, Bulgaria, etc. And they all have to agree before it can be done. As an independent country, we don't. We can go and do trade deals. For example, there are about 27 existing trade deals which the EU has negotiated with the rest of the world. I believe legally the UK has entered into those in its own right, so they could continue. And even so, we could go to each one of those countries and say, would you like to continue on the same terms as now? And they're going to say yes, because why wouldn't they, if it's beneficial? The President of Colombia was on the BBC News a couple of months ago, in which he was asked this question, would you continue with the same trading arrangements with Britain outside the EU? And he said, of course we would, why wouldn't we? Yeah. They're kind of things that can be decided over lunch or in the afternoon and written up on one sheet of paper. Everything continues as normal.
Any more questions or one-to-ones or anything like that?
One-to-ones would be good.
Yeah, one-to-ones is great for you can.
Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for coming.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.